I knew something was off the second Deacon Reese smirked at the table and said, Ops is just here for formality, right? Like we were window dressing at a dealership. Me, the one who'd kept the eligibility chain clean through 4 audit cycles, reduced onboarding exceptions by 93%, and practically rewrote the vetting clause when legal couldn't untangle its own compliance spaghetti. But sure, Deacon, I'm just here to color code resumes and nod while you fast track your frat buddy's cousin with a sketchy crypto startup on his CV. He strolled in late to the candidate review, Starbucks cup raised like he was making a toast to ignorance. The air around him had that tech bro haze, buzzwords, and blind confidence. His first contribution? Tossing out half the red flagged profiles I'd spent 2 weeks vetting. Too rigid, he said about a former NSA contractor with a spotless clearance trail. Too old school, he scoffed, pointing at a woman with 20 years in forensic auditing. I didn't flinch. I just flipped the folder closed, slid it back into my satchel, and tapped the post-it I'd marked 3 days earlier. Section 6.4, Eligibility Authority. And hey, before we go any further, if you're one of the 97% who listen to stories like this without subscribing, give it a second. Hit that like button, subscribe. It really helps the team bring more of these real deal stories to light. All right, back to Deacon's ego parade. The thing is, Deacon didn't know who I was. Not really. He'd skimmed my badge, saw ops liaison, and assumed I handled swag orders and lunchtime catering preferences. I let him. It's easier that way. People show their hand faster when they think you're nobody. And by the time they realize you're the one holding the clause that can freeze their entire hiring pipeline, it's already too late. I didn't push back in the room. I didn't argue when he threw out profiles I'd tagged with critical compliance gaps or rewrote our vetting funnel without so much as looping in legal. Instead, I started documenting. Not just the resumes, not just the skipped protocols, the attitude, the arrogance, the assumption that rules were for other people and he was here to move fast and break things. I've seen what that attitude breaks. It's never the system. It's the people crushed underneath it. So I logged every override he made into the eligibility tracking sheet, not our internal one. The external ledger, time-stamped, read only, and mirrored to legal's review archive every midnight. He had no idea it even existed. Most people didn't. That's what made it powerful. It wasn't about catching mistakes. It was about having proof when someone pretended they never made them. And sure enough, 2 hours later, I was dropped from the email chain. I got the forwarded thread from one of the junior HR partners. It was short, but brutal in its clarity. Deacon wrote, I don't care who she thinks she is. We're pushing ahead with these two. Tell ops to stay in their lane. I didn't reply. Not to him, not to HR, not to anyone. I printed the email, I annotated it, I stapled it to the front of the compliance binder labeled Tag 6R, Leadership Overreach. And I waited. Because when you know the system better than the people trying to exploit it, you don't need to shout. You just need a quiet moment, a clean record, and the right room to read it in. The message came in at 2:11 p.m. sharp. Subject line, Final Review, Approvals Not Needed. That was rich, considering I was the final review. My name was literally listed on the contract appendix under Required Approver, Operational Vetting. Deacon either hadn't read it, or worse, he had and decided it didn't apply to him. That level of arrogance doesn't come from ignorance. It's born of a man who's been told too many times he's visionary for skipping the rules everyone else bleeds to uphold. The thread was already 4 emails deep when it landed. Deacon had looped in HR, talent, even the client-side PM, all cheerleading his picks. 2 fresh-faced resume patters with more TikTok experience than threat modeling. My name, not mentioned once, except in his lovely closing remark, I don't care who she thinks she is, we're pushing ahead. A punctuation mark on a decision chain that should have legally included me. He even copied the client firm, which would have been funny if it wasn't so damn reckless. I didn't hit reply, I didn't forward it to my boss or CC the compliance director. I just opened my archive script, tagged the message under Leadership Overreach, tag 6.4, and let the auto backup do its thing. The archive had 2 triggers, content violation and process breach. This one tripped both, a neat red flag for legal's morning crawl. They wouldn't act on it yet, not unless it escalated. But the moment it did, they'd have the thread. Untouched, time-stamped, immutable. Then I walked over to the printer, not the shared one, mine. The one nobody touches but me because I keep it off network for exactly moments like this. I printed 3 things. The email thread, the Section 6.4 clause from the vendor-client agreement, and a screenshot of our onboarding portal dashboard, specifically the part that required my digital key to unlock new user credentials. No key, no system access. It's a shame Deacon never asked how that part worked. The clause itself wasn't flashy, but it was ironclad. All hires with access to client-side operational infrastructure must be reviewed and approved by the designated primary operational liaison prior to system credentialing. It wasn't just a preference, it was baked into the procurement language. Our legal team had helped write it when a previous manager hired a data scientist who turned out to be a YouTube astrology influencer. That incident cost the company 4 clients and an entire fiscal quarter. Ever since then, 6.4 was sacred. Deacon didn't even ask what 6.4 was. He just assumed he could fast-track his people and lean on the board's obsession with agile hiring. He didn't know the board had quietly reinstated my oversight clause after the last vendor breach, or that they'd told me not to make noise, just keep the paperwork clean and be ready to step in when needed. I took them at their word. No drama, no lectures, just documentation. So I printed the documents, filed them under pending violation, and updated the onboarding review log with 2 names marked in red, credentials withheld pending compliance review. Meanwhile, Deacon held a Slack AMA about disrupting outdated hiring models. I watched from the sidelines, sipping cold coffee and jotting down timestamps. Every word, every skipped step, every joke about the paperwork zombies in ops was another notch on the rope he was pulling tighter around his own neck. I didn't flinch. I didn't scowl. I didn't even mutter under my breath. I just kept doing what I was trained to do. Keep the receipts. Let the process breathe. Let the rope tighten. Then wait for the audit trigger to pull. Deacon strutted into the pitch like it was his TED Talk debut, sleeves rolled up, collar popped like he was about to sell us a timeshare instead of a hiring slate. The client's oversight committee sat across from him, buttoned up, data-driven, and not particularly thrilled to have their time wasted. But Deacon had that startup glint in his eye, the kind that thinks charisma can outpace regulation. I'd seen it before. Hell, I'd buried it before. He opened strong, too strong, skipped the credentialing rundown, glossed over background check anomalies, and didn't even mention the compliance flags I'd raised in the system. It was like watching a magician saw the wrong box and smile while the audience gasped. He clicked through the deck with the smug assurance of a man who thought bullet points were optional and oversight was a suggestion. Nobody's ever read these things anyway, he joked, referring to the vendor onboarding requirements. The room didn't laugh. One of the client's engineers actually frowned and scribbled something down. 10 minutes in, he'd already tanked 2 required checkpoints. One candidate lacked full residency verification. The other's previous employer had a fraud case pending. I documented both, flagged them for review, and, shocker, been completely ignored. When the 3rd slide hit, showcasing streamlined onboarding metrics built from data he fabricated using provisional access logs, I clenched my jaw but said nothing. I wasn't there to fight him. I was there to let him fail. During the break, one of the observers, client side, sharp eyes, salt and pepper hair, military posture, walked over to me near the back wall where I'd been quietly flipping through my printed compliance packet. "You're not speaking today?" he asked, genuinely curious. I didn't answer immediately. I just slid my thumb down the margin of the packet until it hit the line I'd underlined twice in blue ink, turned it toward him, tapped gently. He read aloud under his breath. "Only approved hires vetted by POL shall receive system credentials." He looked back up. "That's you, right?" I nodded once. He didn't ask another question. He just nodded too and walked away. That's the thing about real authority. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't need a spotlight or a slide deck. It's a single clause buried on page 17 of a contract, enforced by the one person who actually understands what happens when it's ignored. Back in the room, Deacon went right back to fluffing his hires. "We've prioritized culture fit over rigid checklists," he said, like the words due diligence were beneath him. At one point, he waved toward my corner and said, "Ops has reviewed most of this, I think," with that smirking upward lilt that said he had no clue what I had or hadn't approved. That's the moment the COO side-eyed me. No words, just a glance. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't save him, because he didn't need saving. He needed to crash, hard, into the reality that processes exist for a reason, that skipping compliance isn't disruption, it's negligence, and that when you lock a door without checking who holds the master key, you'd better pray they're not standing in the room watching you fake the credentials. My approval stamp wasn't on those hires. My name wasn't in the slide deck. But my authority was written into the infrastructure of every system credential form, every access gate, every onboarding API. And I hadn't lifted a single finger to unlock a damn thing. It was a Thursday. Gray-skied, half raining, the kind of day that makes everything feel like it's waiting to break. I was halfway through organizing credential logs when the ping came through, not from our side, but from the client's InfoSec lead, Amira Patel. Subject line was short, precise. Eligibility confirmation, additions from 11 defendants submission. Inside the email, no small talk, just one line. Your name's listed on the roster as primary operational liaison. Can you confirm the 2 recent additions passed your vetting process? That was the moment the wheel clicked into place. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I opened my compliance mirror folder, navigated to the time-stamped approvals log, version-controlled, digitally signed, and mirrored nightly to our legal backup node, and copied the segment from October through November. 47 entries. 45 had my approval stamp. 2 did not. Their names, Bryce Maddox and Lily Kwan. Deacon's darlings, no vetting trail, no background auth. No multi-factor verification on credential prep. Just 2 smiling headshots uploaded into our pipeline through a side door request and buried under an expedited need tag. I had flagged both accounts for pending review the moment they appeared. No approvals granted, no credentials issued. They were ghosts in the system, live profiles with no lawful keys. I took a screenshot of the ledger, highlighted the relevant lines, attached the original system export as a CSV, then replied to Amira's email with 6 words. Attached. These 2 are not approved. No need to explain further, the record spoke for itself. A minute later, I got the read receipt. 10 minutes after that, she replied, "Thanks. We'll escalate internally." No emoji, no signature flourish, just cold, clean escalation. I sat back and exhaled, just once, through my nose. It wasn't satisfaction, not yet. It was something steadier. Controlled vindication. The kind that doesn't rush into the spotlight but waits patiently in the wings, knowing the show isn't over, but the script has already turned. By the end of the day, 2 system access requests had been flagged by the client's compliance hub. One was formally suspended pending eligibility confirmation. The other? Rejected outright. I didn't send a single message to Deacon, didn't nudge legal, didn't pull HR into a side thread. I just watched the pressure rise on its own. Because truth doesn't need volume, it needs documentation. Quiet, verified, dated, and irrefutable. And Deacon? He still had no idea the house of cards he built was already swaying in the breeze. He was too busy prepping for a follow-up call with the client, still thinking the worst thing that could happen was a minor pushback on hiring speed. But the real problem wasn't the speed, it was the bypass. And the person he bypassed still hadn't said a word, just handed over a clean, undeniable record that started the slow, professional process of grinding his plan into dust. The sync was supposed to be routine. Quarterly vendor integration check-in, light agenda, just enough structure to let Deacon preen in front of the client while pretending to be collaborative. He had his sleeves rolled and collar popped again, like he thought that made him more agile. The slide deck was bloated, the talking points shallow, and every compliment he threw the client's way was laced with that Silicon Valley aftertaste, over-rehearsed sincerity. He was already too comfortable when the topic swerved. One of the client's technical leads, quiet guy named Hector, asked about the credentialing timeline for the 2 new engineers. Deacon laughed. "We've streamlined the pipeline," he said, smug and unbothered. Then he grinned. "Don't worry, Ops is on mute." I felt heads turn toward me at the far end of the table. I hadn't said a word the entire call, hadn't even opened my laptop. Just sat there with my notepad and a closed folder. Until that moment. I slid the folder forward to the company counsel. Janice Liu, sharp as glass and allergic to risk. She opened it slowly, her face unreadable as she scanned the first page. It was the full hiring thread. Deacon's email, "I don't care who she thinks she is," highlighted in red. My name excluded from every approval loop. The exact language from section 6.4 printed beneath it in bold. She turned the page, Cross-referenced the email timestamp with the eligibility clause. Page 3 held a copy of the system dashboard, those same two names, flagged pending review, with credential keys left deliberately unissued. She didn't say anything at first, just read, then read it again, then closed the folders slowly, deliberately, as if the weight of what she held needed ceremony. She stood. No theatrics, no throat clearing, just looked across the room, first at the client's leads, then at the executive team, then finally at Deacon, and asked, calm as a still pond, "Can anyone confirm Mr. Reese was granted authorization to bypass Section 6.4? Silence hit like a freight train. The head of HR blinked like she'd just woken up. One of the client reps set down his coffee with a quiet clink. Deacon shifted in his seat, suddenly less golden boy, more twitchy intern on the first day of work. "I mean, we were moving fast and—" "That's not what I asked," Janice cut in, still calm. "Were you given written authorization to override the eligibility clause?" He opened his mouth, closed it. I watched his pupils dilate like someone had just turned the lights on inside a lie. The VP of Ops, who until that moment had been more interested in his phone than the meeting, finally looked up. "Is this the clause that's tied to our vendor compliance certification?" Janice nodded once. "Yes. It's also tied to contractual liability in the event of unauthorized credentialing." More silence. Longer this time, and deeper. No one moved. No one defended him. Not even the folks who'd nodded along in the last hiring call. The air was different now. Cooler, thinner, the kind of air you get when someone realizes the room they're in is smaller than they thought. I didn't speak. Didn't flinch, just sat back, hands folded, as the weight of documentation did what my words never needed to. Janice didn't need to say a word to cue it. The entire legal team stood up in near unison and quietly exited the room, files in hand, nothing dramatic, just precise movement with surgical intent. The kind of exit that makes people's stomachs drop, because you know they're not leaving, they're loading. 10 minutes passed, no one spoke. Then the conference line lit up, unplanned, unscheduled. A partner from the client firm had dialed in. Not the account manager, not the tech liaison. The partner. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Effective immediately," she snapped, her voice clipped and angry. "We're pausing onboarding until proper review is confirmed. That includes credential issuance, system access, and platform privileges for all flagged profiles." Her voice hung in the air like a blade. Deacon shifted forward in his seat, trying to reclaim ground. "This is just bureaucracy," he said, laughing nervously. "These are formality stalls. Our hires are vetted, they're clean. We've done this before without all this red tape." He was still mid-sentence when the COO raised a hand without looking at him. "Stop." It wasn't loud, it wasn't rude, but it was absolute. "If Harlan didn't sign it," the COO said, still staring at the folder Janice left on the table, "it's not compliant." Deacon's mouth opened and closed twice before he leaned back like someone had hit him with a tranquilizer dart. The boardroom felt different now, like the oxygen had been slowly siphoned out and no one was quite sure how to breathe. The client call ended with no thank you, no goodbye, just a hard click, like a gavel in a courtroom. Someone from HR stood halfway up, then awkwardly sat back down. Legal returned without comment, just resumed their chairs and started writing. Janice didn't look at Deacon again. She didn't have to. The COO turned toward me, first real acknowledgement all meeting. "Can you confirm your log is current?" I nodded once. Time-stamped, mirrored, and backed nightly. The flagged names were never approved. He nodded back, nothing more. But that nod was everything. It was recognition, validation, and judgment in a single motion. A quiet crowning of authority, not with title or applause, but with trust. Deacon didn't speak again. He didn't make eye contact. His hands stayed clasped in front of him like he was waiting to be told when to leave. He probably thought this would blow over, that it'd get smoothed out with an apology email and a training module on procedural alignment. But he misunderstood the nature of silence. My silence wasn't passive. It was active. It was curated. It was loaded with receipts, clauses, authorizations, and timestamps that, when read aloud, didn't yell. They removed people. Like him. And the printed email chain, the one he laughed off just days ago, it sat dead center on the table like a smoking gun. Paperweight, landmine, and obituary all in one. He just didn't realize it was already written in his name. By 3:40 p.m., Deacon's meetings started vanishing from the shared calendar, one by one, like dying stars. His weekly talent sync? Cancelled. Client pipeline strategy? Gone. His usual coffee chat with a leadership placeholder evaporated without a trace. No alerts, no explanations, just silence swallowing his footprint in real time. That's how you know it's serious, when even the calendar stops pretending you exist. Security didn't do the dramatic perp walk. There were no boxes, no tearful exits, just two quiet men in gray blazers who waited by his desk while he typed something half-hearted into Slack. His laptop dimmed mid-message. Auto log out. And just like that, his access died before he could even send a goodbye GIF. HR didn't issue a memo. There was no damage control statement, just a single, sterile auto-forward in the global inbox. Role currently under review. Future correspondence regarding Mr. Reese should be directed to the interim ops chain. The interim ops chain was one name long. They called me in 15 minutes later. No parade, no applause, just a cold conference room, the kind with scratchy chairs and a view of the FAC units. Compliance director, legal liaison, and a folder. That's it. The folder was already open when I sat down. No speech, no congratulations, just a page slid forward and a pen. At the top, under the header, Org Structure Revision Immediate, was one new title, Operational Integrity Lead. No fluff, no mission statement, just a direct reporting line from me to compliance with dotted line visibility into talent, legal, and vendor assurance. A role that didn't exist last week, because it didn't need to, until someone like Deacon made sure it had to. I signed. That was it. The compliance director closed the folder, nodded once, and said, "We'll route all future onboarding through your office." I nodded back. No pride in the gesture, no smugness, just the click of gears slipping back into alignment. A system that had been derailed, briefly, returning to its calibrated setting. Deacon didn't cross my mind as I walked back to my desk, not even when I passed his empty chair, still rolled slightly out, badge still dangling on its clip, like it had just lost its owner mid-sentence. Because this was never about him. Not really. It was about the clause, the contract, the process, and the power of being the one who actually read the fine print. The office didn't feel victorious, it just felt quiet, correct, balanced, exactly how it should have stayed all along. The first thing I did, before I even moved into Deacon's old seat, before they printed a new badge or changed my title in the system, was pull the onboarding ledger, every single entry. No one asked me to, no one needed to, because when a breach nearly slips through on your watch, even if you blocked it, you don't patch the hole. You rebuild the hull. I printed the full record going back 6 months, ran each line against the archived credential trail, background verifications, system access keys, client approval matches. If there was even a hint of backdoor activity or approval drift, I flagged it. 2 entries, Deacon's last-minute pets, had no operational confirmation, no credential logs, and most damning of all, no vetted audit trail. Invalidated immediately. They'd never accessed the core systems. My refusal to activate credentials held, but they were formally removed from the onboarding record and tagged as non-compliant initiates. HR would have to handle the fallout. I wasn't their babysitter. Next, I did what should have been done a year ago. I restructured the entire approval flow. From now on, no one gets access from a Google form, a Slack ping, or a forwarded email chain that smells like desperation. Onboarding would run through one locked funnel, biometric authorization, multi-key credential vaulting, and time-stamped approval embedded directly in the system backbone. No biometric match, no key issued. And the root ID for that vetting? Mine. I didn't gloat about it, didn't post some rousing Slack announcement or drop motivational quotes into onboarding dashboards. I just updated the workflow doc, linked the new chain, and let legal know the revision had already passed compliance thresholds. System changes would mirror by midnight. By morning, every new hire request would trigger a built-in 6.4 compliance audit, before the first resume even got a glance. Then I turned to the backlog. Deacon's pipeline proposals, candidate decks, fast-track requests, all of it lived in a shared drive titled Talent Acceleration Initiative. I renamed the folder, disregarded pathways, archived it, read only, sealed behind compliance access, left a note in the metadata, retained for audit trail only, not reflective of current onboarding policy. That was the most acknowledgement Deacon would ever get from me. The rest of my changes were quiet, foundational, not flashy, rolled out credential logging overlays tied to my signature, embedded access denial auto notifications with templated compliance language, mapped escalation protocols for any attempt to override the POL signature in future reviews, and I restructured the candidate scoring model so that vetting flags could never again be hidden behind culture fit nonsense or whatever buzzword shield was in fashion that week. When I was done, I sat alone in the admin panel for a minute, watching the new chain run its first cycle. Clean, immutable, secure. This wasn't revenge, it wasn't even a response, it was repair. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was sitting in someone else's mess. I was sitting in something built to hold. It was a month later, in a sterile conference room 10 floors above where the real work happens. Polished wood table, chilled water bottles lined up like little soldiers. The external auditors were mid-cycle with the client's oversight team, running their annual review, the one where they dig through everything you think you've buried and ask the exact question you hoped no one remembered. I was there at the request of legal. Just a formality, they said. Probably wouldn't even need to speak. The round table was running smooth. Bullet points, check marks, confirmation nods, until they got to onboarding compliance. Let's walk through the recent eligibility process revision, said one of the lead auditors, tapping her iPad. Specifically, the adjustments made following an unauthorized credentialing attempt. There was no blame in her tone, no sharp edge, just the kind of language people use when they already know the answer and just want to hear it from the source. Janice looked to me. No cue, just instinct. I reached for the folder, flipped it open, and slid the document stack forward. Inside was everything. The original approval ledger, the revised biometric chain, the time-stamped rejection logs for the 2 ghost entries. All of it ordered, clean, unredacted. The email thread, Deacon's now anonymized remarks, the exclusion, the policy violation sat at the top, highlighted in yellow. The client's lead rep smiled, not performatively, just something real. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a small brushed metal token, passed it across the table. Thanks for keeping the thread, he said. I nodded, didn't smile back, just placed the token beside the folder like a paperweight. From the far side of the table, a new hire, maybe 2 weeks in, barely out of orientation, raised their hand. Sorry, they said quietly. I'm still learning the ropes. Just who actually finalizes eligibility? The room shifted a little. You could feel people glance my way. I didn't answer immediately. Just closed the folder with both hands. Let the silence sit. Then I said, evenly, whoever understands what the word authorized actually means. Not louder than necessary, not softer than the room could hear, just enough. After the meeting, legal walked the auditors out. HR buzzed past, heads down, all business. I stayed behind a moment, looked over to the legal office where, just outside the glass wall, a new display had gone up. That thread, Deacon's, now stripped of names, framed under museum glass. Beneath it, in gold letters etched into the base plate, silence speaks loudest when the record is clean. I didn't linger, just turned, walked past the badge scanner and back to my desk. No crown, no speech, just the quiet certainty of knowing. It's not the voice that holds the power, it's the paper.